Welcome everyone to the September 2nd, 2020 Diagnostics Working Group meeting. We are going to go through the agenda, and after that we are going to do a deep dive in one of the issues flagged for the deep dives. But before that, does anyone have any announcements this week? Okay, so moving to the regular agenda. First item is issue 34895 on the Diagnostics Working Group repository. Oh no, that's the pull request on Node.js/Node. Create Diagnostics channel module. So, Sifin, I believe you added to the agenda.
Yep. So I opened that pull request recently, continuing the diagnostics channel work that Microsoft folks did like a few years ago, and just making a bunch of changes beyond what they did originally to make it a little better performance tuned, and just got a bunch of different feedback, which I've tried to incorporate everything I could. Currently, I'm in the middle of working on trying to add unsubscribing to it. It's been a little bit awkward and haven't quite solved yet. But once I can get that solved, I'll get back to. There's a couple other comments in there that should be relatively easy to deal with. There's something about there's a should publish function to check if like a channel has anything listening to it, which currently will actually create a channel when it is used. So you can change that so it doesn't create a channel. Yeah, that right there.
Cool.
And I assume like this is the base, like the diagnostic channel infrastructure. We don't actually have anything pushing anything to it yet, do we?
No.
Okay.
But once I have the core design of it a little more solidified, I'm gonna start putting some hooks in a few places. The first one I'm gonna look at is the HTTP server, because that fits pretty well with for an APM vendor. So with this API is that we can combine this with async local storage, and it should basically eliminate the need for monkey patching like almost everywhere.
Okay.
And the reason to start with HTTP server is that's one of the core things that we currently have to monkey patch, because we need to be able to wrap the entry point of an HTTP request in like the appropriate context to create transaction objects.
Yep.
Which we can sort of kind of hack a little bit currently by just like inserting like request event or like request handler before the actual server request handler, and like injecting our own like preconditioned stuff to just set things up. But that kind of requires messing with the order of events, and like none of that is actually documented necessarily safe stuff to do.
Yep. Yeah, no, it seems like an excellent first place to show that like the combination of the two gets rid of monkey patching needs. So
yeah, so this diagnostics channel, I mean, technically we could just emit like a pre-request event and have the same thing for the setup, but there's a bunch of like extra stuff that we want like information about the request. Like we want to be able to intercept the URL and things like that, just for like being able to attribute like this request came from this URL. So I want to put in an event that we can gather a couple of those things and trigger that right before the actual request event, so that we can use the subscriber to that event in Diagnostics channel to create the context to bind everything to. And if I can get a demo of that in there, I think it should help to demonstrate, like, yeah, we've eliminated like this entire category of patching that
Yep.
every APM has to do, and it's fragile and has like demonstrably broken several times.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good one.
Do you have an ATA for landing this request? I know it's hard for estimating landing stuff on Node.js, but
Yeah, I don't have any specific ETA. I'm under contract from Datadog to work on this for 3 months. I'm just reached 1 month in, so I have 2 more months to work on this. So hopefully it's in a landable state before that.
Less than 2 months, right?
I would hope.
Yeah.
yeah, I was mostly thinking if we have any chance of getting it on V15, which the cutoff is in 3 weeks, I think.
Yeah, I'll try to get it landable as soon as I can, but I mean, yeah, it's up to everyone else reviewing what they think is acceptable.
The other thing is this isn't breaking, right?
It's a new top level.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
okay.
major.
It
It
currently is. I'm considering a slight change to. I can move the module just into internals and then expose it in like something else, like the async hooks module, even though I don't think it fully makes sense there, but just for the sake of being able to land it in a minor, I could do that and then have like a major that re-exports it in the place we want it to be ultimately.
Too bad we didn't call async hook something like diagnostics or something instead that was a bit more general.
Yeah. But
we can still do that, I think.
I'm just working on this. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Maybe we can add a diagnostics top level required.
Yeah. One thing I was actually kind of thinking of while working on this is like it'd be kind of nice if Node had like just a module that was like nursery or something like that, which like any new experimental thing just automatically gets exported in that, and then when it's ready to like go prime time, then it gets like a major release with an actual top level module. Like
right.
It makes it like both easier to get it like out there more quickly, without like interfering with the like top level namespace, but also like provides a bit more clarity. This like, yeah, this is like a brand new thing. Don't expect stability from this yet.
Right. Yeah, I guess because then it would actually, it's really breaking because people would have to change their code, but
Yeah.
you could even name that experimental.
Yeah.
Because then it's really clear that you're using something experimental when you require experimental.
I think the only challenge on having a experimental or nursery top level module is for modules that are early birds trying, they are going to have to rename it later. in their code when exporting, when importing?
Well, what you can do without too much pain is like we could put something in this like experimental nursery, whatever you want to call it, module, like under a namespace. So like this is the namespace that's intended to have this top level module when it's ready to, and then when you like go to require it, you can just do like try catch require and try to require the like top level name of this. If it doesn't exist, then try the experimental path for it.
That's
Like,
an interesting idea. Yeah.
yeah, and like we could even like have our own like special like experimental require function that does that internally if we really wanted to. Like,
Right. Require experimental, and it would, yeah.
That's interesting, yeah.
Yeah, that's quite a, yeah, I think that's quite an interesting idea.
yeah, as the diagnostics channel anyway. It's like basically all functional in its current state. There was like memory leak concern. I wouldn't quite categorize it as a memory leak, but it was kind of being called that. But yeah, just the potential memory pressure of how it was storing stuff has been improved. So it won't hold channels open itself anymore. It does mean there's currently a small issue that I need to deal with, which I'm working on right now, which is that the currently the subscribers, if you have like a named subscriber, it just does like it internally just does like this dot channel name dot subscribe. So it like goes directly to create the channel and subscribe on that channel, but that channel might get garbage collected because it's not being stored on the Diagnostics channel manager anymore. So that subscriber actually needs to get stored on the manager and then attached to named channels anytime they appear. And so like the change to like be able to collect channels means that a channel with a specific name might come into existence and then disappear and then come into existence again and disappear. So we need to make sure like all things are like all subscribers are held indefinitely, unless you explicitly unsubscribe it. And so as part of the unsubscribing stuff, I'm working on changing it so when you subscribe to a name, which would map directly to the channel, it still would store that in the subscriber list on Diagnostics channel object instead of directly on the channels immediately.
How do the channels come and go? Like,
So there's like a dot channel function that you give it a name and like you'd hold on to that and you can run subscribe on it directly, but that's less intended. It's more intended for like publishing. Mm-hmm. So like your module, you might at the top level create a channel object and then keep calling publish on it like inside of your module functions, and just it being held by lexical scope means that it will live as long as it needs to.
Okay, so it's for channels outside of Node itself, though.
Well, inside of Node as well, it could be used. Like it might have like a top level channel.
Right, but I was thinking that the channels in Node shouldn't disappear, right? Like they're probably static.
Well, static-ish. They like it would live as long as the module. So like if you require HTTP and then you go and delete the module from the module cache and stop using it, it might get garbage collected. So that would get collected with it. If you put something at the top level of the module, most likely it's going to live as long as the process lives.
Mm-hmm.
So you never have to think about garbage collection, but it's still theoretically possible that
Okay.
the results in the module getting collected.
But the channels outside of core makes, anyway, you have to deal with it for them anyway. I was just understanding that that was the case. Okay.
Yep. And outside of core, yeah, people could create these anywhere in theory. In the docs, I want to strongly encourage, like, you should create a top level publisher or top level channel, because just creating these at runtime all the time is expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like kind of a big part of the design here, is that I get this is kind of like an event emitter, but I'm creating this separate channel object so that you can reference this directly in memory, and so there's no like name lookup every time you go to publish an event. It's like currently with an event emitter, you do like emits whatever your event name is and then the data after that, and every time you do that, it has to look up in the events object. It has to like find the names event list, and that lookup is not free. And also in the event emitter design, you have to do that lookup to be able to figure out if anything is even listening.
Right.
Whereas if you have a direct reference to this object, you can do something like that. In this pull request, I have actually two separate prototypes for the channel object, which once it gets its first subscriber, it switches to a new prototype that actually does publishing. So until a channel has a subscriber, publish does literally nothing. It's a blank function.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah. That's very, very little cost.
Have you reached out to web frameworks or to other APM companies or companies like Sentry?
Not yet.
Basically subscribers and customers?
Yeah, I've talked a little bit with some Express folks, but other than that, like, haven't really reached out too much to other like APM vendors or anything yet.
Right, because I'm thinking, so it would be good to have buy-in from frameworks and from some APMs before landing it on core, just to make sure that it's going to be used. Because if we release it and it's not used, it doesn't really make that much sense.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I would try and get on the web frameworks team next team meeting to give like a presentation on it.
Yeah.
Get some feedback. That would be a good way to get a bunch of people from the different web frameworks fairly easily.
Yeah. Do you know what day that is?
Let me find it in the calendar. Hold on. I see tomorrow, actually. Tomorrow, 1, 2, 3 is the next. Is that right? Sorry, 1 to 2 is the next meeting. Let's see, is there github.com, what the agenda looks like.
I might be able to join that a bit later. I have a meeting at 1 tomorrow. Let's see.
Yeah, the two things that are on the agenda are kind of like the long-standing issues. So I guess they're going to talk about agency. So maybe if you want to comment in there that says, you know, I could make the second half or whenever you think you could make, and you know, bring you up to speed on the diagnostic channel. You know, even paste in the link on for the PR.
I'll have a look at that later today.
Yeah, sounds good.
I'm at Cascadia all day, so busy with conference stuff. Try and find a moment for that.
So I might join too tomorrow if we are going to be discussing the diagnostics channel.
Sure.
All right. Anything else on this topic?
No, I think that's it.
Anyone have any questions? Any suggestions? Okay, moving to the next one. Revisit meeting frequency. So the idea was to move to bi-weekly meeting. Okay.
Yeah.
The idea was to move to bi-weekly meetings instead of weekly meetings. And we started doing that. So I think we can skip it for today. We should have a few more meetings to decide if it's good or not for us. Maybe we should remove from the agenda. One of the ideas was to keep the agenda as clean as possible.
Yeah, I think removing that until you want to put it back on after a few weeks or.
Yep. And the next one is async hooks. Since Stephen had to leave, I don't think we have anything to discuss on that. So we have 30 minutes for a deep dive. We have a few topics. I would suggest we go through the existing user journey documents just to see if we are missing anything, and to make sure we can move forward with adding this to the website. Does that work for everyone, or does someone have another suggestion?
Makes sense to me. Would you mind pasting the link
Sure.
in the chat window? Thanks.
Okay, so let's start with the memory leak document. So the thing is, we have a different format for each document. It might be a bit weird to go through everything, but I think we should do it. So we have a few symptoms for the memory leak. Exceptions about allocations, etc. GC activity, more frequent. Crashing because of lack of space. I don't know what tick means. So, and some caveats, running out of memory leaks doesn't always mean you have, running out of memory doesn't always mean you have a memory leak. You could just be allocating a lot. Depending on Linux settings, it can queue before P8. And you can run out of memory because of misconfiguration. So reading through these symptoms, one thing I'm thinking is we should rename this from memory leak to just memory issues. Also cover the cases where we're running out of memory because of, for example, high allocation rates. I'm gonna change this memory issues. The other symptom we have is, which is not a symptom. Okay, the next step is to confirm if you have a memory leak. SOP can help by looking at how much memory is allocated from a system perspective. Node report /report also has information about heap usage. JavaScript heap field on, is it still the JavaScript heap? Doesn't you know?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
On the other hand, the node report, I guess we are referring to the third-party module node report.
Yeah, I think we started this document before the report was merged on Node.js, so it might be a bit outdated already.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think the fields are still the same, right?
Same, but I guess the third-party module is about to be sunset. The only reason why we are still keeping node report as a third-party module still endorsed by the project is the fact that we have Node.js 10 still in the LTS LTS support format, and node report is the only module that is supported in Node version 10. As soon as Node version 10 goes out of support, we could actually sunset Node report as well. So I think it's a small window between now and the time when we are actually going to publish this. Yeah. So diagnostic report is it should be the one where when we actually publish this document.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Users could compare sum of all spaces. And here's a note that some improvements that we can have for the report. We also have GC traces. Turn it on and observe GC is getting less and less effective. After GC cycle, memory usage is not going back to previous levels. Can see growth over time. You can turn them with trace GC or trace GC verbose, and there's also a C++ API to detect how long GC is taking, starting and ending, with size information before and after. We also have perf hooks now, I think. That are also able to detect how long GC is taking. I'm not entirely sure if it shows how much space is allocated though. So it's only time information.
Are we talking about the performance hook capabilities that's developed by James?
Yes.
Okay.
The upside of the perf hooks compared to the other methods is that it's JavaScript only, it's on core, you don't have to restart the process. So this is probably the best way to do this analysis on production. But if you also need allocation information, the C++ API is more comprehensive.
I agree, yeah.
And the last tool that we recommend is Valgrind with native code, which only works on development environments. And I'm gonna add here that if absolutely necessary, eBPF can be used in production to get similar results from Valgrind. But yeah, preferably users will want to avoid that.
This could be linked to the issue about eBPF.
Yeah. We since this is not Node.js specific, I don't think it's worth going on a deep dive about that. But just like Valgrind, mentioning that it exists is important in my opinion. But going on a deep dive is probably not relevant to our documentation.
Okay.
So after determining if there is a memory leak, the user can use the Heap profiler to identify the code path where most of the allocation is happening. We listed some of the advantages of using the Heap profiler. It can be a bit confusing if the leak is small compared to other allocations. But the overhead is also small, so in some cases it will still be the preferred tool. If users can afford the overhead, the snapshot works as well. Can compare snapshot. I don't think the. Oh no, you still can compare snapshots. It's expensive in production, but it might be affordable, especially if the service is load balanced. It all depends on how much memory is allocated and the acceptable latency for P99 requests. And we also mentioned Valgrind here. There is another tool on Chrome DevTools that is a combination of Heap Profiler and Heap Snapshot. It's almost a Heap timeline where you can see all allocations, how they are happening over time. It's really comprehensive, but it's probably the most overhead between all of these tools, and it's probably not usable on production. But I think it's worth mentioning. So I'm gonna go ahead and add it here. And I added to do here to explain better in the future. Gaps in current use cases and tooling. Native memory. I don't think we improved the situation here that much since we started this document.
No, there is no change in the state.
Yeah, I think things like JS objects mapping to native heap, I think it improved a small fraction with the memory tracking mechanisms we have on core, but since it's still a manual process, mostly, we can still miss some allocations, and especially native add-ons can miss allocations. So I wouldn't consider it a solved problem, although it's probably better than the situation was before. JS objects can be small but still keep a large native memory. As JS said, small. It's related to the problem above, in my opinion. Since we can't track native heap, we can determine how much space the JS is holding. And GC doesn't prioritize it, even though GC could free them up. I don't think that's actually true. I don't think that's how GC works on V8. So it might be worth double checking this assertion.
Yeah, even I did not understand that quite much. So basically, if I understand correctly, the live objects are scanned through a graph based on the active life of the objects through the thread stack. Everything else is deemed as garbage. So there is no priority between garbage objects, right?
Right. Ideally, we could see the relations between JS and C++. There's a C++ API to correlate. Oh, there it is, the memory tracking mechanism we use. Sounds API. Is that what
in theory, you could have a number of C++ objects which are backing up the JavaScript objects. And in theory, all of the C++ object can leak. In practice, I believe the leak or the actual production problem can be very much confined into one or two specific objects, such as the ones which are making use of buffers, native buffers, shared array buffers, things like that. Not necessarily any other wrapper objects in the SRC folder like TCP, UDP, the wrappers of these things. I'm not sure whether they really leak memory. I mean, in theory, yes, but in practice, I'm saying.
Yeah, I think the buffers, they don't leak memory, but they can... Yeah, here's where leaking starts to get a bit ambiguous, because we mix leaking from native code and from JS, which have different meanings. But thinking strictly from a JS perspective, yes, we can leak buffers and shared buffer arrays, which will also retain native memory. I'm not entirely sure if the native memory is accounted for today. I know we improved some of the situation, but I'm not sure if we improved all of it. Especially for those objects, as I agree with you, those are the most likely to generate leaks. So it's probably worth double checking if those vulnerable objects are being tracked properly.
Yeah. So I guess there are two things here. One is the leak is happening in the C++ layer itself. That is, some new objects are getting created in the C++ heap, and they are not garbage collected, or they are not freed as expected. That is one type. Second type is the JavaScript heap is holding on to a huge object, but the size of the object is not fully reflected in the JavaScript heap. As seen through the heap profiler tools, we see a small amount of heap as retained. But behind the JavaScript object, there is a huge amount of native object that is pinned into the JS object. I think that is a category of problems which could potentially be seen in the production, or rather, that's where production could be impacted.
I agree, but I still think we have tracking for some of those objects today, not all of them. For like tracking the retained memory in a way that V8 understands that the object is retaining memory, and it shows on the profiler and it shows on the heap snapshot. I'm like 80% sure we have this, but I haven't checked this code in a long time. So
Okay.
yeah, that's something we definitely need to check. And
the other type of leak, isn't it something which the native memory trackers such as Valgrind can catch? The pure C++ memory leak?
Yes, the pure C++ memory leak can be tracked via Valgrind, via eBPF, or other native tools.
Okay.
It just doesn't work that well in production, but yeah. And I think we cleared the buffers when the objects are GC'd. Again, I haven't seen this code in a while, so I'm not gonna say that for sure. But that's also something we should look to make sure that we are not leaking anything.
Yeah.
And just a quick comment, you also mentioned like sockets, file handlers, etc. Those are more likely to leak system resources than memory because they don't hold that much memory. So for example, they can leak sockets, they can leak file descriptors, but they don't have that much native memory allocated. I would
agree.
expect the JavaScript memory to be bigger than the native memory in this case.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know what sounds API means. I think it's a typo, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, it may be read as sounds like, because Michael Dawson uses that word. So maybe, I'm just guessing. So it may be rewritten as sounds like or looks like. Maybe.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Sounds like API is not available. So this is probably like this should probably be a subtopic of the other one. There is an API that correlates JS memory, and sounds like, yeah, that makes a lot more sense. So this API I'm talking about, we had this note that sounds like the API is not available on Profiler or Snapshot. I think it is today. So yeah, I think this whole native memory is worth taking a second look again, because things changed in the past 2 years. I know we still have problems, but it's probably better than the previous situation.
Yeah.
And then we had some action items that I'm pretty sure we didn't complete, at least not all of it. Document APIs. I think we documented some stuff from memory leaks, but not all of it. And engage with V8. We haven't engaged as a working group with V8 in a long time. That's probably something we should do in the future. I'm gonna create an issue for that later. And moving on to coherent gaps on JavaScript memory. In Heap snapshot, it is hard to connect objects with where they are allocated. Yeah, I think this is not the case anymore. This other tool that I mentioned, the allocation timeline, it covers that use case. So I'm going to go ahead and strike through this one and mark this as done, because I actually tested the API. We just need to document it later. Going through use cases could help uncover gaps. Yeah, understand overhead and document. I tried to understand the overhead in the past. The code is very complex. It mixes, it has a lot of dumb stuff, which is not relevant to Node.js. So I still think there's potential for optimization on the Heap snapshot. I'm not entirely sure if it's worth investing the time. It might be worth if we have if we're collaborating with V8, but alone I don't think we have much. I think it would be a huge effort, and it could still be not usable in production even after that. So I don't think it's worth exploring that much, reducing the overhead as a working group.
Yeah, I agree.
So I'm going to strike that through as well.
Here we are talking about the overhead for collecting the heap snapshot, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the thought process I have is, it's just a thought. Not sure how the V8 implements the garbage collection algorithm and how it manages the JavaScript heap. Without knowing too much into that, here is my thought. I guess it definitely has the young or new generation and old generation concept. Mm-hmm. That means objects are graduated to different levels of heap based on the type time they survive in the heap. So when we are moving from generation to generation, is it possible for the V8 folks to basically annotate or account or segregate each objects based on the generation in which they took birth or they lived, and essentially being able to give us a snapshot of only the delta difference from the last snapshot. So what I mean to say is there is an old space, there is a new space, and the heap statistics is keep changing according to the time. At some point of time, it took a snapshot, and V8 understands this is the last heap snapshot. And whatever changes happen to the state of the heap with respect to object lifecycle is captured internally. It is maintained at any point in time. And when we ask for a snapshot, just look at this generation information and provide only the delta. Maybe uh, maybe it may be a lightweight approach if it is implemented in the V8. But again, I'm just thinking aloud. I don't know how easy or how possible this is.
So a few comments first. I like this idea like a lot. It's like a sampling heap snapshot. I don't know how to call it, but it sounds really cool because you can see the how the objects, which objects are moving at each generation and how they are moving and how fast they are moving. I'm not sure if this would be less overhead than the heap snapshot in a long-running analysis. If it's if the user runs it on a short period, I think it will be fine probably, but I'm not entirely sure. In the long run, I'm actually stretch that. I think it's yeah, I think it's less overhead than the heap snapshot overall. I like this idea.
Yeah, yeah. One of the premise or one of the justification is that definitely this is going to give an approximation of the state of the JavaScript only. But if you look at the diagnostic proceedings for leak analysis, if you take a profiling snapshot or if you compare two profiling snapshots, look at the new objects and look at the deleted objects, you always look at the top objects, top 10 or 20 objects. You don't really look at all the objects that got created and all the objects that got deleted. So there is always a level of approximation that is being made in the debugging problem determination step. So that means to say this approach, though this is error prone, meaning it might miss some of the objects movements. Still, for most of the practical purposes, for diagnosing memory leaks and finding the predominant leak suspects, I think practically it would be okay.
Yeah, so that sounds really effective, and I think if it misses some objects, it's not really a problem. It's going to miss, for example, objects that are allocated directly on outspace, but that's usually not what the users are leaking, I think. So I think that's definitely worth exploring. I wouldn't be surprised if the allocation timeline is implemented on top of that premise, but it also takes a heap snapshot. So maybe it's just a matter of removing the first heap snapshot and keep taking this generational sampling snapshot.
Yeah.
It's something we should definitely discuss with V8. Cool. So we are at time for the meeting. We gone through all the memory leak document. So next meeting, unless we have other topics, we can continue to process crash. And then performance and then unexpected behavior. And hopefully we can start moving this stuff to the website so that users can start getting access to it.
Yeah.
Cool. See you all in 2 weeks. Thanks for coming. Bye-bye.
Sure. Thanks. Bye.